Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. Look, if you're going to survive on an ice planet at the edge of nowhere, you need three things: a sense of humor, a functioning heater, and the good sense to not ask questions when both of the first two fail you. Corporal Audrey had the humor down pat. The heater? Well, that was currently making a sound like a dying whale having an argument with a garbage disposal. The sense? Jury was still out on that one. Tell me again why we're stationed on a planet that makes Antarctica look like a beach resort? Audrey muttered, her breath forming clouds in the air despite being inside the so-called climate-controlled outpost. She adjusted her thermal armor plating, the cerulean blue panels humming softly as they worked overtime to keep her from becoming a human popsicle. Private Colton, ever the optimist, and by optimist we mean the kind of person who reads equipment manuals for fun, looked up from his data pad. Because the Galactic Mining Consortium pays us 30% above standard rate for hazard duty? Right, hazard duty, which I'm pretty sure is code for "we're too cheap to fix the heating system, so here's some extra credits to buy your own thermal underwear." Audrey tapped the wall panel, which flickered and then died completely. Fantastic. That's the 5th generator sector to go offline this month. Glacius 9 wasn't just cold. It was the kind of cold that made you wonder if the universe had a personal vendetta against the concept of warmth. The mining colony sat in a crater basin, surrounded by ice cliffs that rose like frozen tsunami waves, forever suspended in the moment before crashing down. The sky was a perpetual gray-white, and the wind? The wind sounded like it was personally offended by the existence of anything not frozen solid. The outpost itself was a collection of prefabricated modules connected by enclosed tunnels, all of it sitting on permafrost that shifted just enough to keep everyone mildly paranoid about structural integrity. 236 souls called this place home, if you could call working 16-hour shifts, mining rare isotopes from beneath the ice home. Humans, Chitauri, a handful of Ryloth traders, and one very grumpy Volnath engineer who swore in 6 languages every time someone asked him about the heating. "You know what I miss?" Audrey said, staring at the ice crystals forming on the inside of the window. "Complaining about things being too hot. Remember hot? That was nice." Colton actually smiled at that, which was as close to rebellion as his by-the-book personality allowed. He was the kind of guy who color-coded his duty reports and actually enjoyed inventory day. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of square jaw that made him look like he'd stepped out of a recruitment poster, Colton believed in 3 things: protocol, procedure, and the chain of command. In that order. Audrey, on the other hand, believed in getting the job done, keeping people alive, and finding the humor in absolutely everything, because if you didn't laugh, you'd freeze, and not just from the cold. The comm system crackled to life, interrupting what was shaping up to be a perfectly good grumbling session. "All security personnel, report to Command Center. Immediate. Administrator Nalcor wants everyone present." Audrey and Colton exchanged glances. Administrator Nalcor wanting everyone present was never a good sign. The Chitauri administrator was 6 limbs of bureaucratic nightmare wrapped in a chitinous exoskeleton that clicked when he walked. He ran the colony with the warmth and compassion of a tax auditor during an audit of a tax auditing firm. They made their way through the connecting tunnels, passing miners coming off shift, their faces drawn and tired. The colony had that particular smell of recycled air, machine oil, and the faint ozone tang of overworked life support systems. Inspiring stuff. The command center was a circular room dominated by holographic displays showing mining operations, weather patterns, and the colony's perpetual red-flagged maintenance alerts. Nalcor stood at the center, his compound eyes reflecting the blue glow of the displays. When he spoke, his translator rendered his clicking mandibles into flat, emotionless standard. We have received a distress signal from Survey Team 9 in the northern mining sector. Nalcor's two primary manipulator limbs gestured at the map. They reported encountering hostile fauna and requested immediate extraction. Contact was lost 18 minutes ago. Audrey felt her stomach drop. Survey Team 9. That was 6 people. 6 people out there in the killing cold with something hostile. "We're scrambling a response team?" she asked, already moving toward the equipment lockers. Negative. Nalcor's antennae twitched in what might have been the Chitauri equivalent of a dismissive wave. Resource allocation protocols are clear. We cannot risk additional personnel and equipment on a recovery operation with a low probability of survivor retrieval. The cost-benefit analysis. Cost-benefit? Audrey's voice went dangerously quiet. There are 6 people out there. Were 6 people, Nalcor corrected, with the kind of pedantic precision that made you want to check if insects could technically be punched. Current atmospheric readings show temperatures dropping to minus 63 degrees. The incoming storm system will reduce visibility to 0 within the hour. Survival probability is statistically negligible. We will send a recovery team when conditions improve. In 3 days. 3 days. They'd be frozen solid in 3 hours. Colton's hand on her shoulder was the only thing that kept Audrey from saying something that would end her career. She took a breath, tasted the recycled air, and forced herself to nod. Understood, Administrator. They left the command center. Audrey walked exactly 15 steps down the corridor before stopping. "We're going after them," she said. "Audrey." "Don't Audrey me. 6 people, Colton. 6 people who went out there because Nalcor wanted to expand the mining grid ahead of schedule. You saw the weather reports last week. Command knew a storm system was coming. They sent them anyway." Colton looked conflicted, which was his default expression when regulations and reality had a fistfight in his brain. "We have direct orders not to respond. If we take a transport without authorization, then we'll get written up. Oh no, whatever will we do?" Audrey was already heading toward the vehicle bay. "You coming, or are you going to file a report about how you watched me leave?" Here's the thing about Colton. For all his love of protocol, he was a good man, and good men, when pushed, tend to choose people over paperwork. He sighed. It was the sigh of someone watching their spotless service record develop its first blemish. "Transport 6 has the best cold weather package. I'll prep it." "That's what I like to hear." The vehicle bay was kept at barely above freezing temperatures to prevent the equipment from thermal shock when it went outside. Their breath formed thick clouds as they did the pre-flight checks on Transport 6, a boxy utilitarian ground vehicle that looked like someone had welded tank treads to a shipping container and called it a day. "Fuel cells are at 92%, Colton called out, running through the checklist with the kind of focus that suggested if he concentrated hard enough on procedure, he could ignore the fact that they were committing a court-martial-worthy offense. "Heating system functional. Emergency supplies loaded. We've got maybe 6 hours of operational time in these conditions." "Then we'd better be quick." Audrey climbed into the driver's seat, her armored gloves gripping the controls. The transport's engine rumbled to life, and the bay doors began their slow grind open. The wind hit them like a physical force the moment they cleared the outpost, the transport rocking on its treads. Visibility dropped instantly, the world becoming a white-gray blur of driving snow and ice. The nav system painted a route to the last known position of Survey Team 9, 36 kilometers northeast, into the maze of ice canyons that the miners called the Scar. "Temperature outside is -58 and dropping," Colton reported, his voice tight. "We've got maybe 90 minutes before the storm fully hits." Audrey pushed the transport as fast as she dared, the treads churning through snow and ice. The landscape of Glacius 9 was alien and hostile. Towers of ice rose like frozen lightning bolts, wind carved into impossible shapes. Crevasses opened without warning, some shallow, some dropping into darkness that could swallow you whole. The ruins of Survey Team 9's camp appeared through the snow like a ghost. Tents collapsed, equipment scattered, and the transport, their transport, was on its side, smoke still rising from a ruptured power cell. They stopped 50 meters out. Audrey killed the engine. "See anyone?" Colton had his rifle up, scanning through the thermal scope. "Negative. But look at the camp. That wasn't the storm." She was right. The tents weren't just collapsed. They were shredded, torn apart by something with enough force to rip through reinforced synthetic fibers. Equipment was scattered in patterns that suggested panic, a scramble, people running. They suited up, full cold weather gear, rifles charged, helmet lights cutting through the blowing snow. The wind tried to knock them over the moment they stepped out. Audrey's armor plating adjusted, pumping heat into her core. But even with the tech, the cold was invasive, searching for any gap, any weakness. The camp was a graveyard. They found the first body 30 meters from the overturned transport, half buried in snow. Then the second. Then the third and fourth, huddled together as if they'd tried to make a final stand. "What did this?" Colton's voice was barely audible over the wind. Audrey crouched next to one of the bodies, brushing away snow. The thermal suit was torn open, and beneath it, claw marks, deep ones. 4 parallel gouges that had gone through armor, through flesh, with surgical precision. "Something big," she said. "Something strong." The tracks were massive, each print larger than her helmet, with 4 distinct claw marks at the front. They led away from the camp, toward the ice caves that honeycombed the canyon walls. That's when they heard it. A sound. Faint, almost lost in the wind, but there. A whimpering. A cry. Audrey and Colton looked at each other. "Could be a survivor," Colton said, but he didn't sound convinced. "Or a trap," Audrey added, "because that's how our luck runs." The tracks led into the caves. Of course they did, because if there was a dark, creepy, obviously dangerous place where people go to die option, the universe made sure you had to walk right into it. The cave entrance was a jagged mouth in the ice, easily 10 meters high. Their helmet lights barely penetrated the darkness inside. The temperature somehow felt colder in there, the wind echoing and moaning through unseen passages. The whimpering came again. Closer now. Definitely not human. They moved carefully, weapons up, every shadow a potential threat. The cave walls were smooth, carved by ancient water or wind, covered in a layer of frost that made them glitter like diamonds in their lights. 50 meters in, the cave opened into a larger chamber. And there, in the center, curled into a ball and shaking so hard it looked like it might fall apart, was the source of the sound. A Sralnai cub. Now, for those of you not versed in galactic fauna, let me paint you a picture. Adult Sralnai are apex predators. The kind of apex that makes great white sharks look like goldfish. They stand 3 meters at the shoulder, weigh close to a ton, and have reflexes that let them snatch drones out of the air. Their homeworld has weather patterns that include acid rain and volcanic lightning, and they're still at the top of the food chain there. They're also, according to every military and civilian authority in known space, shoot on sight, dangerous. No exceptions, no second chances. This cub was maybe 3 months old, the size of a large dog, with fur that should have been sleek and silver, but was instead matted with ice and frost. Its golden eyes, too intelligent, too aware, locked onto them, and it made that sound again. Not a growl, not a threat, a plea. "Holy!" Colton's rifle came up instinctively. "That's a Sralnai. Audrey, we need to neutralize it now. Protocol is clear." But Audrey wasn't listening. She was staring at the cub, at the way it shivered, at the frost forming on its whiskers, at the look in those eyes that said it knew exactly what was happening. It was dying. Slowly. Cold taking it degree by degree. And in that moment, Corporal Audrey made a choice that would change everything. She lowered her rifle. "No," she said. "What?" "I said no." Audrey moved forward slowly, her hands visible. The cub watched her, too weak to run, too cold to even try. "Audrey, stop! That's a predator. It killed the survey team." "Did it?" Audrey looked back at Colton. "It's a baby. Look at it. Those claw marks at the camp were massive. This thing's paws are the size of my fist. It didn't kill anyone." She reached the cub, knelt down. Up close, she could see it was in bad shape. Hypothermia. Maybe starvation. Its breathing was shallow, its body heat barely registering on her suit sensors. And then Audrey did something that would be talked about in military academies as either the bravest or stupidest thing a human ever did. She started removing her thermal armor plating. "What are you doing?" Colton's voice pitched up about 3 octaves. "What does it look like I'm doing?" The chest plate came off, then the arm guards, the thermal units still humming with stored heat. "I'm not leaving it here to die." "It's a Sralnai. In 6 months, that thing will be big enough to rip us apart. In 6 minutes, it'll be dead." Audrey wrapped the armor around the cub, her hands working quickly despite the cold already biting into her. "And I'm not watching another kid die because protocol says it's not worth saving." There was weight in those words. History. Colton heard it, and his protest died in his throat. The cub stopped shivering as the thermal units pressed against its body, warmth seeping in. It looked up at Audrey and made a sound. Soft, almost like a purr mixed with a sigh. "Yeah," Audrey said quietly, her own body already starting to shake from cold. "You're welcome," whisper. Colton stared at her. "You named it? Would you prefer the deadly predator that's currently being a burrito in my armor?" The cold was hitting her fast now, without the armor's protection. Her suit had basic thermal regulation, but it wasn't designed for extended exposure to Glacius 9's killing temperatures. She had maybe 30 minutes before hypothermia became a real problem. Worth it, though. The look in Whisper's eyes, recognition, gratitude, understanding, was worth it. Colton made a decision. He stripped off his own outer thermal layer and wrapped it around Audrey. "You're insane. You know that?" "Been called worse." Her teeth were starting to chatter. "Come on. We need to get back to the transport before we both freeze." Audrey picked up the cub, Whisper, because that name had stuck, and felt the small body relax against her chest. Still cold, still weak, but alive. Fighting. They made it to the cave entrance before Colton grabbed her arm. "Audrey, look!" The tracks they'd followed in? There were new ones, fresh, multiple sets, all converging on the cave. Adult Sralnai, the pack, and judging by the size of those prints, They were close. Real close. "Run," Audrey said. They ran. Running in sub-zero temperatures while carrying a predator cub wrapped in your armor is not, and let's be clear about this, an experience anyone should aspire to have. But there they were, Audrey and Colton, sprinting through ice caves like their lives depended on it. Because, spoiler alert, their lives absolutely depended on it. The howl that echoed through the caverns behind them was not the kind of sound you forget. It was primal, furious, and carried the sort of promise that made your survival instincts start updating your will. "How far to the transport?" Audrey gasped, her lungs burning from the cold air. 200 meters. If we don't get lost, if we don't fall into a crevasse, and if those things don't catch us first." Colton's usual composure was cracking like the ice under their boots. Whisper, sensing the panic, made a soft chirping sound against Audrey's chest. The cub was warming up, which was good. The fact that its family was apparently hunting them down was less good. Significantly less good. They burst out of the cave into the full force of the blizzard. The transport was a dark shape through the white out. Salvation in the form of an ugly metal box on treads. They were maybe 50 meters away when the first adult Sralnai emerged from the cave behind them. Sweet, merciful stars. It was huge. 3 meters of muscle, claws, and what Audrey could only describe as deeply personal anger. Its fur was silver white, perfect camouflage against the snow, and its eyes, those same golden eyes as Whisper, but colder, harder, locked onto them with the kind of focus that apex predators reserve for things they're about to make very dead. "Move! Move! Move!" Colton was already at the transport, yanking the door open. Audrey dove inside, still clutching Whisper. Colton slammed the door shut, just as something massive hit the side of the transport hard enough to rock the entire vehicle on its treads. The metal groaned. A claw the size of a combat knife punched through, the outer plating missing Audrey's head by centimeters. "Drive! Just drive!" Colton was already in the gunner's seat, powering up the defensive systems. Audrey scrambled to the controls, still holding Whisper in one arm. The engine roared to life, and she gunned it, the treads churning through ice and snow. Another impact from behind, this one accompanied by the sound of metal tearing. "We've got 3 of them!" Colton shouted, staring at the rear cameras. "No, wait! 4! 4 adult Sralnai, and they are not happy!" "You think?" Audrey jerked the controls, sending the transport into a sharp turn that nearly flipped them. The creatures were fast, impossibly fast for something that size, keeping pace with the vehicle even as she pushed it to maximum speed. Whisper was making sounds now, high-pitched and urgent, squirming in her arm. The cub was looking at the rear camera displays, seeing the pack, and the sounds it was making were... Is it calling to them? Colton stared at the cub, then at Audrey. "It's calling the pack. It's scared." Audrey tightened her grip, trying to keep the transport steady with one hand while keeping the cub secure with the other. "It doesn't know what's happening." One of the adults leaped, a movement that defied physics and common sense, landing on the roof of the transport. The metal buckled. Claws scraped, searching for purchase, for a way in. "That's it. I'm activating countermeasures." Colton slammed a button, and the transport's defensive systems came online. Electromagnetic pulse charges detonated along the roof, designed to disable drones and electronic surveillance. The Sralnai on the roof howled and jumped off, but it wasn't hurt, just annoyed. Really annoyed. "Those were our only charges," Audrey shouted over the alarms that were now blaring. "We've got nothing left." The transport lurched as they hit a drift, nearly stalling. The pack was closing in, 3 of them flanking, 1 straight behind. They were coordinating, working together with the kind of tactical precision that shouldn't be possible for animals. Except, Audrey was starting to realize, they weren't just animals. "Colton, look at them! Really look!" He did, studying the camera feeds even as the transport bounced and skidded through the ice fields. The Sralnai weren't just chasing, they were herding, forcing the transport into a specific direction, away from the outpost, toward— "Oh, that's not good," Colton breathed. "They're pushing us toward the Scar." The Scar was a massive crevasse system, a maze of ice canyons and dead ends where mining teams had lost equipment, drones, and one very unfortunate survey team the previous year. If they got trapped in there, the pack would have them cornered. Whisper made a sound, different from before. Not a cry, not a call. Something else. The cub wriggled free from Audrey's arm, jumped onto the console, and pressed its small nose against the window, staring at the pursuing pack. And then it did something that made both humans freeze. It made a series of short, sharp chirps. A pattern. Deliberate. The pack stopped chasing. Just like that, all 4 adult Sralnai broke off pursuit, coming to a halt in the snow. They didn't retreat, didn't leave, just stopped and watched. "What just happened?" Colton whispered. Audrey slowly brought the transport to a stop, her heart hammering. Through the swirling snow, she could see the pack clearly now. 3 adults arranged in a protective formation, and 1, larger than the others, standing at the front. The matriarch. She was massive, easily half again as large as the others, with scars across her muzzle and shoulders that spoke of a long, violent life. But her eyes, those golden eyes, were locked not on the humans, but on Whisper. The cub made another sound, softer now, and the matriarch's whole posture changed. The aggression drained away, replaced by something Audrey recognized because she'd seen it before, in a dozen different species across a dozen different worlds. A mother who'd found her lost child. "Oh," Audrey said quietly. "Oh, we're idiots." "What?" "They weren't hunting us, Colton. They were tracking the cub. We took their baby." Colton stared at her, then at the pack, then back at her. "So what do we do?" That was the question, wasn't it? They had a choice. Gun the engine, try to outrun the pack back to the outpost, hope the perimeter defenses would keep the Sralnai out. Standard protocol. Safe. Or— Audrey looked at Whisper, who was still pressed against the window, making soft sounds at the matriarch. She thought about the survey team, about the claw marks, about the blast scoring she'd seen on the adult Sralnai's fur. "The survey team," she said slowly. "They found the den. They opened fire first." "You can't know that." "Can't I?" "Look at them, Colton. Really look. They're not mindless killers. They're parents protecting their young." The matriarch took a step forward. Just one. A test. Audrey made a decision that was either brilliant or would get them both killed in the next 30 seconds. She opened the transport door. "Have you lost your mind?" Colton grabbed for her, but she was already climbing out, Whisper cradled in her arms. The wind hit her like a wall, the cold biting through her inadequate layers. The matriarch was 20 meters away. 15. 10. Audrey knelt in the snow, and slowly, carefully, she began unwrapping her armor plating from Whisper. "I'm sorry," she said, not sure if the creature could understand, not sure if it mattered. "I didn't know. I was trying to help." The cub, free from the armor, looked up at her one last time. Those golden eyes held something that Audrey would swear, until her dying day, was understanding. Then Whisper jumped from her arms and ran through the snow toward the pack. The The matriarch caught the cub, gentle despite those massive jaws, and lifted it by the scruff. She checked it, over with the kind of thoroughness only a worried parent could manage, making soft sounds that the cub returned. Then the matriarch looked at Audrey and walked forward. There are moments in life where time does something funny. Not stops, exactly, but stretches, like taffy being pulled until every second becomes its own small eternity. Audrey was having one of those moments as 3 tons of apex predator closed the distance between them. Colton was screaming something from the transport, probably something sensible like, "Get back in here before you become lunch." But the wind carried his words away. The cold was biting deep now, her body shaking from more than just adrenaline. Without her armor plating, she had maybe 10 minutes before hypothermia stopped being a threat and started being a certainty. The matriarch was 5 meters away. 4. 3. Audrey could see every detail now. The scars crisscrossing the creature's muzzle. Old wounds from fights that would have killed lesser predators. The way her breath steamed in the frozen air. The intelligence in those golden eyes that tracked every movement, calculating, assessing. 2 meters. Do not run, Audrey told herself. Running triggers the prey response. Running gets you killed. 1 meter. The matriarch stopped, close enough that Audrey could feel the heat radiating from her massive body. Close enough to count the serrated edges on those claws. Close enough to see her own terrified reflection in those predator eyes. And then the matriarch did something that would haunt Audrey in the best possible way for the rest of her life. She lowered her head and gently, carefully, touched her nose to Audrey's forehead. The contact was warm, the touch surprisingly soft, despite coming from a creature that could bite through steel plating. The matriarch held the gesture for 3 heartbeats, then pulled back, making a sound deep in her chest that resonated through Audrey's bones. It wasn't a growl. It was something else. Recognition, maybe. Acceptance. Pack. The matriarch turned, whisper still held gently in her jaws, and the rest of the pack fell in behind her. They moved like smoke through the snow. There one moment, gone the next, swallowed by the blizzard as if they'd never existed at all. Audrey stood there, frozen in more ways than one, until Colton grabbed her and physically dragged her back to the transport. "Are you insane?" He was shaking her, checking for injuries, for bites, for signs that she'd lost her mind. "That thing could have killed you, should have killed you. What were you thinking?" "I don't know," Audrey said honestly, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely form words. "I really don't know." Colton wrapped her in every thermal blanket they had, cranked the transport's heater to maximum, and started the drive back to the outpost. Neither of them spoke for the first 10 minutes. They were too busy processing the fact that they were still alive. They were intelligent, Colton finally said, his voice quiet. The way they coordinated, the way the cub communicated with them, that wasn't animal behavior. "No," Audrey agreed, feeling sensation slowly returning to her fingers and toes in waves of painful pins and needles. "It wasn't. The survey team. If they found the den, if they opened fire first. Then we've been calling them monsters while they were just defending their children." Audrey closed her eyes, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. "And the galaxy has been hunting them for decades based on the assumption that they're mindless killers." The implications of that were staggering. How many Sralnai had been killed on sight? How many dens destroyed? How many cubs left to freeze because humans and other species shot first and never bothered with questions? They made it back to the outpost as the storm fully hit, the blizzard reducing visibility to absolute zero. The transport's nav system guided them into the bay on instruments alone, and when the doors finally sealed behind them, Audrey let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Administrator Nalcor was waiting for them, all 6 limbs practically vibrating with bureaucratic fury. His compound eyes somehow managed to convey extreme displeasure, despite being, compound eyes. "You disobeyed direct orders," he clicked, his translator rendering the words with maximum disapproval. "You took colony resources without authorization. You endangered yourselves for a recovery operation that was deemed not cost-effective. Explain yourselves." "We found survivors," Audrey said, which was technically true if you counted one predator cub as a survivor. "The survey team? Dead. All of them." Colton stepped in, his voice falling into that formal report-giving cadence. "Attacked by indigenous fauna. Multiple Sralnai, adult specimens. We barely escaped." Nalcor's antennae twitched. "Sralnai? There was no indication of Sralnai presence in that sector." "Well, there is now." Audrey was too tired and too cold to care about diplomatic phrasing. "They have a den in the ice caves. Probably have had one for months. The survey team stumbled on it, and the pack defended their territory. Then we must organize a purge immediately. If there is a Sralnai nest in the northern sector—" "No." The word came out harder than Audrey intended, but she didn't take it back. Nalcor's entire body language shifted to something between surprised and offended. "Excuse me?" "I said no. We're not purging anything." "Corporal Audrey, you seem to be confused about the chain of command. I am the administrator of this colony. I make the decisions regarding—" "They're intelligent." That stopped Nalcor mid-click. "What?" "The Sralnai. They're not animals. They coordinate, they communicate, they use tactics. They're intelligent, and we've been treating them like pests." Colton was staring at her like she'd grown a second head, but he didn't contradict her. He'd seen it too. They both had. Nalcor was silent for a long moment, his mandibles working in that way that meant he was processing information he didn't like. "If what you say is true, this is a matter for the Galactic Council. Potential sentience claims require extensive documentation, multiple expert evaluations, years of study. While we do what exactly? Keep shooting them. Protocols exist for a reason, Corporal." And there it was. Protocols, procedures. The same kind of thinking that had left 6 people to die in the cold, because the cost-benefit analysis didn't work out. Audrey was about to say something that would definitely end her career when the perimeter alarms went off. The command center erupted in activity, displays lighting up with motion sensors and thermal imaging. Nalcor scuttled to the main console, his limbs flying across the controls. Perimeter breach, southern wall. Multiple contacts, large heat signatures. He pulled up the camera feeds, and everyone in the room went very, very quiet. The Sralnai pack was outside the outpost, all 4 adults, visible in the swirling snow, sitting just beyond the defensive barriers. Not attacking, not threatening, just sitting there, watching. "They followed us," Colton breathed. "Why?" Nalcor's translator couldn't quite hide the edge of panic in his clicks. "What do they want?" Audrey moved closer to the displays, studying the pack's positioning. The matriarch was at the front, and in her jaws, held carefully, was something. "Zoom in on the matriarch," Audrey ordered. Someone did. The image resolved, and several people in the command center made sounds of confusion. The matriarch was holding a chunk of ore. Not just any ore. The distinct blue-green color of lithium deposits. The rare isotope the mining company had been desperately searching for. the stuff that made this entire operation worthwhile. She held it for a moment longer, making sure everyone could see it, then set it down carefully in the snow at the perimeter edge. Then she and the pack turned and walked away, disappearing into the storm. The command center was silent, except for the hum of equipment and the howl of wind. "Did that thing just," one of the technicians said slowly, "bring us a sample of the ore we've been looking for?" Audrey felt a smile tugging at her frozen lips despite everything. Yeah, I think she did." Nalcor stared at the display, at the chunk of ore sitting in the snow, at the tracks leading away into the darkness. You could practically hear his bureaucratic brain grinding through the implications. Intelligence, communication, trade, and most importantly, a species that apparently knew where the valuable deposits were. "I need to contact corporate headquarters," Nalcor said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "This situation requires escalation to the executive level." Translation: this was above his pay grade, and he was passing the decision up the chain where someone else could take responsibility. "In the meantime," he continued, mandibles clicking in what might have been resignation, "I am instituting a temporary moratorium on hostile action against Sralnai in colony territory, pending further evaluation." It wasn't much, it wasn't nearly enough, but it was something. Audrey nodded, too exhausted to push for more right now. "Understood, Administrator. You're both confined to quarters pending a formal inquiry into your unauthorized operation. Dismissed." They left the command center, and Audrey was fairly certain she heard Nalcor immediately get on the comm with corporate, probably spinning the story to make himself look as good as possible. "We just made first contact with an intelligent species," Colton said as they walked through the corridors. That's huge. That changes everything." "Maybe," Audrey said. "Or maybe corporate decides it's cheaper to wipe them out anyway and take the ore by force." "You're a real optimist, you know that?" "I'm a realist. But hey, at least we're not frozen solid in an ice cave. Small victories." They parted ways at the barracks. Audrey collapsed onto her bunk, her body finally starting to warm up, her mind still racing with images of golden eyes and gentle touches and intelligence that the galaxy had been too blind to see. Sleep came eventually, fitful and full of dreams about snow and claws and a small voice chirping in the darkness. She had no idea that in 3 weeks everything would change again. But that's a story for the end. 3 weeks, 2 formal inquiries, and 1 very uncomfortable deposition later, Audrey was still employed. Barely. Her official record now included the phrases reckless disregard for protocol, unauthorized resource allocation, and, her personal favorite, excessive empathy in a crisis situation. Excessive empathy. Like that was a thing you could have too much of. The galaxy, as it turned out, moved slowly when faced with things that didn't fit into neat categories. The Galactic Council had received Nalcor's report about potential Sralnai sentience with all the urgency of a sloth processing tax returns. Committees were formed. Subcommittees were formed to oversee the committees. Everyone agreed that more study was needed, which was bureaucrat speak for, "We'll think about it and get back to you never." Meanwhile, the consortium's corporate office had crunched the numbers and arrived at a conclusion that surprised absolutely no one who understood how corporations worked. Potential intelligent life was great and all, but lithium deposits were better. Much better. Quarterly earnings report better. Still, they were smart enough to realize that wiping out a species that might be intelligent, might have legal standing, and definitely knew where the valuable ore would be, in the words of their legal team, suboptimal from a public relations standpoint. So they did, what corporations do best. They compromised in the worst possible way. A research team was dispatched to study the Sralnai. The fact that this team included 3 xenobiologists and 12 heavily armed security personnel suggested that research was being interpreted pretty loosely. The mining operations in the northern sector were suspended. Temporarily. Pending assessment. Probably. And Audrey? Audrey was reassigned to perimeter patrol, which was either punishment or a way to keep her far from any decision-making authority. Possibly both. She didn't mind. Perimeter patrol meant she was outside, away from the recycled air and flickering lights, and the constant reminder that 6 people had died because someone decided protocols mattered more than lives. Colton was with her most days, having somehow avoided any serious consequences, despite being equally guilty of unauthorized resource allocation. He had a gift for making everything sound like it was within regulations, if you squinted hard enough at the paperwork. "Any sightings today?" he asked, scanning the horizon through his rifle scope. "Negative. Same as yesterday. Same as the day before that." Audrey adjusted her armor. She had new plating now, after the old set had been thoroughly chewed, clawed, and used as a blanket for a predator cub. "They're avoiding us." It was true. The pack hadn't been spotted near the outpost since that night they'd delivered the ore sample. The research team had found the den in the ice caves, but it was abandoned. The pack moved on to somewhere the humans couldn't follow. Maybe they're just smart enough to stay away from the species that shoots first and asks questions never, Colton offered. Maybe. But Audrey didn't think so. There was something else going on. She could feel it, the same way you could feel a storm coming before the first clouds appeared. They were 3 hours into their patrol when Audrey spotted the tracks. Fresh ones, small ones, cub-sized. Colton. He saw them too, and his hand went to his rifle on instinct before he stopped himself. Could be any young Sralnai. Doesn't mean it's the same one. How many cubs you think are wandering around the outpost perimeter? Point taken. They followed the tracks, which led along the defensive barrier, then out toward a cluster of ice formations that the miners called the Teeth. The blizzard had cleared days ago, leaving the landscape sharp and crystalline under a pale sun that gave light but no warmth. Whisper was sitting on top of an ice boulder, watching them approach. The cub had grown in 3 weeks. Not much, but enough to be noticeable. The matted fur was sleek now, healthy, and those golden eyes tracked their movements with the kind of focus that suggested the cub remembered exactly who they were. "Well?" Audrey said quietly. "Hello again." Whisper made that soft chirping sound, the one that had first led them to the cave. The cub stood, stretched in that languid way cats do, and jumped down from the boulder with far more grace than something that size should possess. Then it walked right up to Audrey and bumped its head against her leg. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," Colton muttered. "It imprinted on you." "That's not how imprinting works." "Then explain why a apex predator cub is acting like a puppy." Audrey knelt down slowly, and Whisper immediately pressed against her, making sounds that were definitely purrs. She ran her hand through the cub's fur, feeling the muscle and power already developing beneath. "You're not supposed to be here," she said softly. "Your pack, your family, they're out there somewhere safe. You should be with them." Whisper looked up at her with those 2 intelligent eyes and made a sound that almost sounded like disagreement. Movement caught Audrey's attention. She looked up, and her breath caught. The matriarch was standing 30 meters away, perfectly still, watching. The rest of the pack was behind her, partially hidden by ice formations, but definitely there. 4 adults, And now that Audrey was looking carefully, she could see two more cubs, slightly larger than Whisper, playing in the snow. "They've been here the whole time," Colton breathed. "Watching the outpost. Watching us." The matriarch took a step forward, then another. She moved with that liquid grace that made you forget how dangerous she was until you remembered, oh right, those claws could open you up like a can of soup. She stopped 5 meters away, close enough to be a threat, far enough to not be immediately aggressive. Then she did something that made both humans freeze. She scraped at the ice with one massive paw, deliberate movements that carved lines and patterns. When she finished, she stepped back. Audrey moved closer, studying what the matriarch had drawn. It took her a moment to understand, and when she did, something cold that had nothing to do with the temperature settled in her stomach. It was a map, crude, simplified, but unmistakable. The outpost, the mining sectors, and marked in several locations, scraped deeper into the ice, were symbols, ore deposits. The matriarch had drawn a map showing where the lithium was. "They've been watching us mine," Audrey said slowly. "They know what we're looking for. They know where it is." "And they're offering to show us," Colton finished. "That's not a peace offering. That's a trade proposal." The matriarch made a sound, deep and rumbling, and gestured with her snout toward the map, then toward the outpost, then back to her pack. The message was clear. "You want the ore? We know where it is. But we're not leaving our territory. We're not going to be hunted. We're going to coexist. Take it or leave it." Audrey looked at the map, at the matriarch, at Whisper, who was still pressed against her leg. She thought about protocols and procedures and all the ways the galaxy liked to pretend that complicated problems had simple solutions. "We need to get this to Nalcor," she said. "He'll just send it up the chain. Corporate will take months to decide anything." "I know, but it's a start." Audrey pulled out her data pad and took hollows of the map from every angle. The matriarch watched, patient, as if she understood exactly what Audrey was doing and why. When Audrey finished, she stepped back, meeting the matriarch's gaze. Slowly, deliberately, she touched her own forehead, mimicking the gesture from 3 weeks ago. The matriarch's eyes, if a predator's eyes could show emotion, seemed to soften. She returned the gesture, touching her nose to Audrey's forehead, with that same careful gentleness. "Pack." Then the matriarch turned and walked away, the rest of the pack falling in behind her. Whisper hesitated, looking between Audrey and the retreating pack, clearly torn. "Go on," Audrey said quietly. "They're your family. Go." Whisper made one last sound, something between a chirp and a purr, then bolted after the pack, young legs churning through the snow. The cub caught up to the matriarch, who lowered her head and gently nipped Whisper's ear in what could only be described as affection. They disappeared into the ice fields, and for a moment Audrey could swear the matriarch looked back. She did. The bureaucracy ground on, of course, because that's what bureaucracy does. The holos made their way up the chain, each level adding more delays and more committees and more reasons why a decision couldn't be made today. But something had shifted. The research team filed reports about Sralnai intelligence, about tool use, about social structures that suggested not just sentience, but culture. The mining consortium, seeing the potential for a partnership that could access ore deposits they'd never find on their own, started using words like cooperation and mutual benefit. It would take years, maybe decades. The galaxy didn't change overnight, no matter how much you wanted it to. But it was changing. 6 months later, Audrey was back on perimeter patrol when she spotted tracks in the snow. Small ones, cub-sized. She smiled. Whisper was watching from a ice ridge, bigger now, almost adolescent, but still with those same golden eyes. The cub, not so much a cub anymore, made a sound that carried across the frozen waste. Audrey touched her forehead in greeting. Whisper returned the gesture in its own way, then turned and loped off into the ice fields, free and wild and alive. And Audrey thought, not for the first time, that sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was exactly the right thing. Sometimes survival meant more than just staying alive. Sometimes it meant remembering that the thing shivering in the cold wasn't a monster or a threat or a line item in a cost-benefit analysis. Sometimes it was just a kid who needed help. And yeah, humans were stupid enough to take off their armor and help anyway. Stupid, wonderful, excessive empathy-having humans. The galaxy was probably better off for it, whether the galaxy realized it or not.